In this video, I want to talk about left hand control and just general control on the guitar, because as I often say to students, it's what you don't play that's more important than what you do play. And that doesn't necessarily mean the notes in which you play, but rather how you play those notes. Now I'm talking about this because I get quite a few questions across my channel asking how I play so clean, how I have a lot of clarity in my playing, especially when doing things like raking or picking with a lot of attack, because more than often players will do these kinds of things and you always have that annoying background noise and it just sounds really messy and horrible. So if you're that kind of person, then listen carefully, because I got a few tips for you and a couple exercises that you can hopefully take away to help improve the clarity of your playing. Let's start off by talking about the left hand, since I think this is the most important hand when it comes to control on the guitar. There are a bunch of points that I want to share with you, but I think the most significant and the most important is that when you're fooling around on the guitar, whatever you're doing, you always want to be touching the string above what you're playing. So if you watch me play a little phrase, so even there on that last note, you can see I'm touching the D string at the end there. So if I were to accidentally play that, or just simply by moving around with this note, it causes the other strings to vibrate. So that in itself is going to cut out a lot of background noise. Now what about when I add more pick attack? As you can see, there's a bunch of horrible noises in there that we need to clean. So here's a great thing that you can play with. We're going to choose a scale, perhaps the pentatonic scale. We're going to play every note of the scale whilst playing every single string. So I'm going to take the key of C sharp minor here. I'm going to play the first note. And you see I played every other string and it sounds good because they're all muted. So you need to think about the curvature on your finger. Perhaps you can use the other fingers to mute the strings. Think about your thumb placement that's going to help you with this. There's a few things that you can think about. So as I go through the scale, you'll find the top string is probably one of the easier ones. As I move on to the A string, I'm touching the string above with the tip of my fingers. And I'm continuing to do that as I pass through onto the next string, whilst introducing the thumb onto the top string to mute that top one there. And then on the G string, similarly, I'm muting the string above with the tips of the fingers here. The thumb's got the top string covered, so the only one exposed is the A string, which is why I introduced that second finger. Moving on to the next string, the B string, it gets quite hard when you come down this far. The tip of the first finger should be covering the G string. And then for those two strings here, we can use the second and third finger to mute those. So you see that's quite clean thanks to these fingers. If I take that off, sounds horrible. Moving on to the next one, if we bring the little finger there, this is quite simple because we can use these fingers here to mute those other strings. And then once again, once we're on the bottom, we need to use these fingers to mute the A, D, and G strings. So I'm just putting the fingers between the strings there. And the B string is covered by the tip of the first finger. And then little finger at the final one, and you just let these relax. And we're all done. So I encourage you to take this exercise, ascend and descend the scale, get comfortable with this. And once you've got that confidently, you should be able to run through the scale quite quickly and clean like this. It doesn't sound particularly melodic and engaging, but that's not the point of this lesson. The point is control, and this is a great exercise to help you with that. Let's now move on to talk about the right hand. So it's important that both hands work together. I would never really isolate the left hand on its own or isolate the right hand on its own. I tend to use a combination of both. So what I mean by that is if I were to rake the 9th fret on the G, for example, notice that the side of my thumb comes into play on my right hand there, whilst I'm not actually using the fingers to mute the other strings here, because that would be quite restricting when you're doing something like vibrato. It just doesn't really work, it's quite challenging. You want that hand to be free so that you can add that attitude into your playing. So in that instance, I'm starting off with the left hand, but then as I come down and hit the note, I let go with those fingers, put the thumb on, and then add the vibrato. And then if I do that quickly, it's one smooth process. So I use that side of the thumb all the time to mute the strings above the intended note, and then the ones below are covered with the left hand. You can also use the palm. If you're doing a rake into a bend, well, obviously you can use those fingers to mute the strings above because you need that for the bend. So to mute these strings, you're gonna need to use the palm and get that slight angle there to lift above the intended note so that you can get that target note and a nice bend there. So there's a bunch of tips and tricks and ideas that you can incorporate into your playing. I hope you took something away from this video. If you did, and you often take things away from my videos, then please consider supporting more content like this by checking out my Patreon page, which is linked in the description below. And until next time, I will see you in the next video.